Today, we're going to make a film noir style lighting model. Let's go. Alright, so we're in the middle of a series of videos on making custom lighting models. Now, game engines have lighting built in, but if you customize the lighting, you can remove features to make it render faster, or you can change the way the lighting works to stylize the look of your game. And so that's what we're going to be doing today. If you haven't seen the rest of the videos in the series, I'll link the playlist down below so that you can go back and catch up. Before we jump into making the shaders today, let's take a look at some reference images. And what I want to do is show you the goal or what we're trying to achieve. We're going to take this Japanese garden scene and make it into a film noir style. And I know that's kind of contradictory because generally film noir is for like 1920s and 30s style private investigation movies and that sort of thing. But we're going to be using this Japanese garden style and turning it into a film noir look. So let's take a look really quickly at some reference, and we'll take a look and see kind of what defines this style. Okay, so you can see the image here is completely black and white and has very high contrast lighting, lots of silhouettes and shadows. And usually, you know, the material is a private investigator with his fedora and his bottle of scotch and his typewriter and that sort of thing. So we're not really worried about the content, but more the look of the lighting. So here are a couple of additional images. You can see it's kind of like a nighttime thing with a lot of volumetric light sources and again, black and white and high contrast. Here's another image. I think some of these are generated by AI. You know, you can see kind of ridiculous half pieces of cars and that sort of thing when AI does ridiculous things. But anyway, what I want you to see is that we're dealing with black and white and high contrast for the most part. All right, so those are our reference images. We're going to be trying to make our Japanese garden scene look kind of like that. And we're going to do this first in Unity, and then I'm going to show you how to do the same kind of thing in the shader in Unreal as well in just a minute. All right, so let's come down here to our project window. Last week, we created this subgraph called Basic Lighting, and it's a lighting model that's just like as simple as possible. And we removed all the extra features like subsurface scattering, like screen space ambient occlusion, reflections and specular, and all those extra things, and just made basic lighting like as cheap as it can possibly be so that it will render fast. And we're going to base our film noir lighting on that one. So I'm just going to copy and paste this and duplicate it. And we're going to call this noir lighting. And what I've got here is my lit subgraph. And here I've got all of the different kinds of lighting that we've created so far. I have simple lighting, tune lighting, basic lighting, and we're going to bring our noir lighting in here as well. Now right now, because I just copied it, it's just a copy of basic lighting, but eventually it's going to look more like those images that I showed you a second ago. All right, so let's connect up our base color. We'll connect up our normal, and we'll connect up our ambient occlusion. And now this is the lit portion of our shader, and we're just going to connect it to the output here. And that's what's going to create the lighting. So what you can see here is we created this nice little stack of lighting models. And switching back and forth between them is just as easy as switching up which one is connected to our output here. So that makes things work really nicely. All right, so let's open up our noir lighting subgraph here. And what we need to do is come over here to the end, and we want to add a saturate node first of all, just to make sure that our range is between 0 and 1. So we add that saturate node so that we know that the lighting coming from our scene is not going to be outside the 0 to 1 range. The next thing that we want to do is make everything in black and white. And in Unity, I can just add a saturation node, and I can set the saturation value to 0. And now obviously in your scene, if you wanted to introduce a little bit of color, you could change this value to something less than 1. So 1 is going to be full color and 0 is going to be full black and white. But if you put that somewhere in between, you could get a less saturated scene. All right, so let's plug that in and switch back to our scene and see what we've got. All right, so now you can see that we've got a black and white scene, and that's pretty cool, but it's not really film noir exactly because we haven't introduced that high contrast yet. So what we want to do is switch back to our noir lighting and just increase the contrast. So the first thing that I'm going to do is, obviously because it's black and white, we only need one channel. So I'm going to add a swizzle node and type X. So we're reducing this from 3 channels down to 1 channel. And now I can do a little bit of adjustment. So the first thing that I'm going to do is add a power node, and we're going to set this to a power of 0.7. And then we're going to add a contrast node, and we can raise the contrast. So by default, it's set to 1, which is no contrast. But if I set this to 2, now my scene has higher contrast. So all I have to do is wire this out, and we'll save it. Now if we switch back to our scene, now we've got a really nice high contrast scene, just like those screenshots we were looking at a minute ago. Really nice film noir style lighting. Now you might be asking yourself, well, I could just do this with a post-process effect. So why don't you do it that way? Well, if you do it in the lighting model itself, instead of as a post-process effect, you can isolate individual objects in your scene, like this lantern, for example. And if I were to change this lantern to use a regular lighting model instead, then I could isolate that and make it colorized while the other objects in the scene were not. So I can make specific, like here you can see that my water shader is not colorized. And so I've got these little splashes of color throughout my scene, and I wouldn't be able to do that if I were doing it as a post-process effect. The other thing that I can do if I'm doing this in the lighting model instead of as a post-process effect is I could do a cool thing in the shader where I made specific locations colorized and all the rest of the scene not colorized. So I could create a mask based on a specific position in the world, and objects in that position could be in color where objects in other locations were not. And we can also do something else, which is what we're going to cover next week. I'm not going to show you how to do it today, but next week I'm going to show you how to take a black and white scene and make the point light sources colorize the world. So right now we've got a black and white scene, but you can see there's a bunch of different point light sources, like this lantern here, these lanterns here, they're light sources along that balcony there. And wouldn't it be neat if we could make the world black and white, but wherever it's affected by a light source, it turns to color. So that's what we're going to look at next week. So stay tuned for that one. But I also want to show you one more technique, and this is kind of interesting. Right now we've got a high contrast scene that's just black and white, but there's also something else that we can do. If we take our scene, starting with this swizzle node here, what we can do is use the black and white value of our scene to look up into a gradient. So the first thing that I'm going to do is change the contrast of my scene just a little bit by adding a power of 0.45. And then again, I'm going to add a contrast node here and increase the contrast to 2. But now I'm going to add a sample gradient node. And this is going to allow me to create a gradient where the values that I'm using, or the values that I'm getting from my scene, determine what color in the gradient we're using. So here's my gradient. And we're going to set this side to be white, and then this side to be black. So now I've got a nice black and white gradient, but I can also set values along this gradient to make a sepia tone scene. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a value here in the middle of my gradient, and I'll pick my color picker, and we're just gonna let's grab a value that's kind of like yellow, maybe a little bit orange, and maybe like a little bit darker. There we go. And if we move it down here just a little bit, let's add another value here. Maybe make it a little bit less saturated and a little bit more yellow. I'm just kind of playing this by ear. Let's make this one just a little bit darker, and then maybe move it this way just a little bit. But what you can see is I'm making a scene that is, instead of being just black and white, now the scene is sepia tone. So instead of high contrast black and white, we can get a scene that's kind of like this stylized filmic look. Let's make it just a little bit more yellow. Yeah, and we can play with this quite a bit. But if we save it and switch over to the scene now, what you're going to see is that I get this kind of really interesting, not black and white, but it's not color either. It's a sepia tone look. Now it's a little bit too bright, obviously, so we're going to want to tone that gradient down. Let's set our gradient to be darker here, and then maybe darker here as well. And this is something that you can play with quite a bit to get just the effect that you're going for. You know, just the right balance of light and color. But it gives you the ability to create a really interesting stylized effect with just a simple gradient. All right, so that is a Film Noir custom lighting model. I hope you enjoyed that. Let's go ahead and switch over to Unreal, and I'll show you how to do something similar in that game engine as well. All right, here we are in Unreal, and we're going to do the same thing here in Unreal that we just did in Unity. You can see I've got my shader set up here. Here's my preview render ball, and I've got my cobblestones material applied to it with a color texture, a normal, and a mask texture. And here is my lighting model. Now, my root node here is just set to unlit. You can see my shading model set to unlit, and all of the lighting that I'm generating is done by this material function here called basic lighting. So what we're going to do today is take that basic lighting material function and clone it, and then make our Film Noir lighting. So I'm just going to copy and paste our basic lighting, and I'll rename it to Noir lighting. All right, so I'll open up our Noir lighting. You can see that we're doing our diffuse lighting here. We're doing some ambient lighting there. And then here at the end, we're passing out our result. So luckily for us, Film Noir is fairly easy to do. All we have to do, the first thing that I'm going to do is add a saturate node. And what this node is going to do is to make sure that the result coming out of here is always between 0 and 1. And now the next thing that I'm going to do is add a desaturation. And the way the desaturate node works is you connect a value to it, and then I need to give it how much desaturation to apply to each of my channels. So I'm going to add a vector 3 node, which unfortunately on Unreal is quite large. And I want to set that saturation, the desaturation, to be 100% for each channel. So for X, Y, and Z, or for RG and B, I'm going to set all those values to 1. Then I can plug that in, and what I'm going to get out of here is a desaturated color. So if I pass this out to lit, now you can see, let's go ahead and save this. We'll come back here, and instead of our basic lighting, let's plug our Noir lighting into our base shader. Okay, so we're going to plug in the base color, we're going to plug in the normal, and we're going to plug in the ambient occlusion. And then instead of basic lighting, we're going to plug our Noir lighting in. And now you can see that we've got a nice black and white image. So we've gone from a lighting model that's just doing some basic calculations and using standard color to now doing our noir lighting where it's black and white. However, in the reference images that we looked at, we saw that it was significantly higher contrast than this. So we also need to come in here and not just desaturate our color, but also increase the contrast as well. So let's add a cheap contrast node and plug our value in. And now this is a value that you can kind of fine tune and tweak, obviously. But let's go ahead and set it to 2 and see what happens. We'll just save this and switch back to our, oh wow, that is an incredibly high amount of contrast. So maybe 2 is a little bit high. Maybe we want to set it to 1.5. Let's try that, see what we get. Okay, still that's probably too high. Let's just do a little bit of experimenting here. Maybe set our contrast to 1.2. Okay, that might work. It's still really high though. I think maybe I need to adjust the power curve a little bit before I do this. Let's try that. So in Unity, I actually added a power node right here. So let's do that. We'll add a power. In Unity, I think I set it to 0.7. So that might work. Let's try that. Yeah, that's working a little bit better. All right, so we've got a nice high contrast image here. Now, obviously, if you're going to use this in production, you're going to want to play around with these values a little bit. You probably want to change your power value here, change your contrast value here to get just the right amount for your scene. But the idea is here now that you've got a shader that does film noir style lighting instead of the regular lighting that's built into Unreal. And the nice thing about this is that, you know, you could come into your shader here as well, and you've got your regular lighting coming out right here. So you could use this. This is your film noir lighting, and this is your regular lighting, and you could blend between the two of them based on some condition. Maybe explosions in your scene colorize the scene, or maybe when a character walks through the scene, they bring color with them, or some other factor. And that's what's cool about creating custom lighting models, is you can kind of allow your imagination to go crazy and make the lighting do whatever you imagine it to be doing. So anyway, that is our tutorial today on creating a film noir custom lighting model. I hope you enjoyed it. Next week, I'm going to show you how to use something similar to create black and white lighting when the scene is lit by the regular directional light. But then when the scene is lit by a point light or an omni light, that point light is going to introduce color into the world. So the world is a black and white area, but when you put light sources in it, now it becomes colorized. So that's what we're going to do next week. Hope you come back for that one. In order to not miss it, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much everyone for watching, and have a great week.